I want to welcome everyone to Leominster Access Television. My name is Bob Saudelli, and I'll be interviewing Mr. Gilbert Tremblay today. I am a member of the City of Leominster Historical Commission, and I'm here today to introduce the citizens of Leominster to the first in a series of interviews focusing on the history of neighborhoods in Leominster, a project called Leominster, A Present to the Future. Many of you in the audience have probably noticed a number of new signs around the city: French Hill, the Plains, Morse Hollow, the Bowery, the Terrace, Kings Corner, and a number of others. These neighborhood signs, installed by the Department of Public Works under the direction of Patrick LaPointe, have generated much interest and conversation around the city. The purpose of the neighborhood signs, as envisioned by Mayor Dean Mazzarella, who initiated the project, is a positive purpose: to encourage in the city of Leominster a feeling of neighborhood identity, a greater sense of community, and that's a positive purpose. The purpose of the series of interviews, beginning today with Mr. Tremblay, will be titled Leominster, A Present to the Future. The purpose is to produce, using the neighborhood signs as a focus, the purpose is to produce an historical record in pictures and words, interviews, so to speak, snapshot of Leominster as it exists today, with some reflections on the past, so that people in the future, 50, 100, perhaps 200 years from now, will get an accurate idea of what Leominster was like in the present times. Our gift, our present to the future. Our interview today is being taped at the brand new studios of the Leominster Access Television. And before I begin to interview Mr. Tremblay, I would like to thank Mr. Carl Pimarini, Mr. Jack Selly, Mrs. Gina Werinen, Mr. Stephen Marini, and our excellent high school seniors who are behind the scenes here with all the technical equipment: Todd Robbins, Rich Levy, and Tony Selly. They, as I said, are fine Leominster High School seniors. And today we are going to be focusing on the French Hill neighborhood, and we're very, very pleased to have Mr. Gilbert Tremblay here today, and I'll stop talking and I'll ask Mr. Tremblay, Gil, to introduce himself.
As Bob said, I'm Gil Tremblay. I was born in my grandfather's house at 151 3rd Street, midway between Spruce and Mechanic, very much the business heart of French Hill at the time, so much so that my grandparents, who never learned to speak English, never had to, because they could conduct all of their business affairs in French on or near 3rd Street, the only exception being banking. And my grandfather learned enough English to be able to handle that by himself. But as he got older, and I did too, I was often the interpreter. So growing up in that neighborhood, it was very interesting, but we'll dwell on that later. After growing up there, I went to school there, by the way, at St. Cecilia's, right across the street, church at St. Cecilia's, and then to junior high school and Leominster High School. After graduation, I attended Clark University for a while and then entered the Armed Forces, the Air Force. Got very smart there in a hurry, realized that college was quite important. So after the service, I went to Fitchburg State College, became a teacher, taught altogether for 36 years, taught English in Marlborough, Harvard, North Middlesex, and the best teaching experience of all, and the one with which I finished my career, was at Leominster High School. I have been retired since 1993 and devoting all my energies to travel and to trying to help in various volunteer projects in the city of Leominster.
Thank you, Gil, for that biographical information and that background. You mentioned that, of course, your connection is to the French Hill neighborhood. You were born in Leominster and you grew up, spent your childhood there. Was there you mentioned St. Cecilia's Church and St. Cecilia's School. Were those the sort of the focal point of the neighborhood, or the center of the neighborhood?
They were, as far as I was concerned. And I like to tell the story about my grandmother, who was very religious. And anytime she saw somebody walking down 3rd Street, Didn't matter what day it was, what time of day it was. If they were heading toward Mechanic Street, they were on their way to church. And if they were heading toward Spruce Street, they were on their way back from church. And that's how central it was. Frankly, as a child, church was not that central, but the school was, because it was a big schoolyard, and there was always activity there. I don't ever recall a time growing up when I didn't have anything to do. There were always a lot of kids around, and there was always a lot of fun. We played games, we played sports, we did all the things kids do.
But within your neighborhood?
Very much so.
Did you see many kids from other neighborhoods, other sections of town?
No, except rare occasions, like there was a swimming pool at the end of Spring Street down in Whitney Field, and kids from other areas of the city would come to the swimming pool. But basically, it was the same kids that I saw in school that I saw in the neighborhood.
So it's far different from today, where the kids, and it's progress, the kids mix in school and see kids from young people from all parts of the city. But in those days, you pretty much stayed within the confines of your own neighborhood. Was that because there weren't cars, or what do you think was the reason for that?
No, it wasn't horse and buggy.
Right.
There were cars. But no, I guess it's just because it was like a little village, and everything centered around that. And that was good in many ways, because you certainly couldn't get away with anything, because everybody knew you. And if you did something, by the time you got back home, your father knew what had happened already and greeted you with the news. So you learned to behave. We did venture forth, go to the movies and things like that, but not into other neighborhoods. It was very different. Less transportation for sure, but yeah, very different.
You mentioned how it was different, and you pretty much stayed within the confines, the bounds of the streets or the neighborhood. Today we go to the supermarket, we may go to the mall, various supermarkets. Was there a particular, or were there a number of little stores where people would socialize or go grocery shopping in those days? Was that the way it was then?
It was. There was a small First National store on the corner of Spruce and 3rd. There was a small meat market on 3rd Street, and there was a grocery store on 3rd Street. In fact, 2 small grocery stores. And everything was so personal that I could go to those stores as a little boy, 5, 6 years old or so, and pick up things either for my grandparents or my parents. We all lived in the same house. And just tell the store man, my grandfather will pay you tomorrow or whatever. And it was as casual as that. As far as hangout, just a little further up the street, there was Lamont's drugstore. And I remember as a young kid seeing the teenagers there, looking forward to the day when I could buy milkshakes or Cokes on my own. Looking forward to that. When it came, it was not that big a deal.
There was soda fountain. Those were the soda
fountain. It
fountain
was soda
days.
fountain.
Actual
That's right.
soda fountain.
Actual soda fountain.
I remember that. I remember that from my area of town. This was in the days when all these various leagues, Little League and so on that we have today, Babe Ruth League, various activities for kids, many of which are wonderful. But in those days, you said that the kids used to make their own, they'd play their games, pick up teams and so on within the neighborhood. Was there a particular field or an empty lot or something?
Yeah, there was. The one we played at was on literally a sand lot behind Laurel Street and behind St. Cecilia's Rectory. And it was a sand pit. And kids would gather there, and we would just make up baseball games, pick up sides, and you learn to play every position, never mind how well. And you learned how to play the game because the older kids would teach you. Sometimes the criticism was harsh, but you worked harder to just live up to their expectations. There was no organized little league or anything of the sort, and I don't think that was so bad. There was no pressure. You just went out and played, and that was it.
And you didn't have to be transported as today, here, there, and everywhere, with the car never getting a rest, with the automobile never getting a rest.
Even in 7th and 8th grade years, the nuns would actually allow us to go out there and play during lunchtime recess. And they knew we were out there, and maybe 10 minutes before it was time to come in, one of the nuns would come out, blow a whistle, and time to go back, so that's what we do.
That was it.
Yeah.
Do you have any humorous memories or anything of that sort from those days? I'm sure you must have an immense number, but
Well,
anything particularly that...
yeah, the silly things we would do. There was my grandfather's house, the house we lived in, actually backed onto Wells Court, which is a little hill and seemed like a mountain at the time, which was great for sliding in the winter. And on the other side of Wells Court, there was actually a dump. And it used to be quite exciting when the trucks would come and dump new loads of garbage there. We'd go rummaging through that, finding redeemable bottles, back then, redeemable bottles. And that would be a stash to get us to the movies. 9 cents if you were under 12 years of age for admission.
9 cents?
9 cents, that's right. And I remember when it went up to 14, I wondered if I'd be able to go to the movies anymore because the price had gone up so much.
And at that time, what were the theaters in Leominster?
The Plymouth
Plymouth?
and the Metropolitan.
Metropolitan.
Later, the Rialto reopened. It was closed when I was younger. It reopened probably around the time I went into junior high school. And they had a policy of running reruns, older movies. So I was very interested in the history of movies and got to see a lot of older movies then.
And for 9 cents, you'd get double feature?
Right. A cartoon.
Cartoon.
And newsreel.
Newsreel. Would there be a serial, too?
There was on Saturdays.
On Saturdays.
On Saturdays. And if you wanted to stay through for another run, it was continuous. So if I liked the movie, I would stay right through and see it twice. For 9 cents.
9 cents.
Uh-huh.
How times have changed.
I guess. I could tell you some more humorous things, too. In the wintertime, when the city would pick up the snow off the streets, they would dump it in this place where we played baseball in the summer. And it was great fun to climb all over these mounds of snow. We called it going to the mountains. And Ernie Capone remembers doing that, too, coming over, crossing Mechanic Street from his home on Walker Street and playing in the mountains.
Now, Walker Street would have been in another neighborhood?
It was, because it was on the other side of Mechanic Street.
But
and it was essentially an Italian neighborhood.
But they're not far apart. They're not miles
No,
apart. They're
no.
only
No,
a few
well,
streets over.
Walker Street is actually a continuation of 3rd.
And yet that was how...
Yeah, that was like a line of demarcation. Never thought of it that way at the time. You just had no particular reason to go there.
And then later on, when did you get to know, because I know you know Ernie, when did you get to first meet him? And
It was one of the early days of my 9th grade career. I was walking to school. I had met Ernie in school by that time.
At Leominster Senior High?
No, 9th grade was at junior high school.
Junior High, Gallagher, May A. Gallagher Junior.
At that time, May A. Gallagher was the principal, not the name of the school.
Oh.
The school was just Leominster Junior High School. And so I was in the same classes as Ernie. And maybe the 3rd or 4th day, walking up 3rd Street to Mechanic to head up to town, I see Ernie coming the other way. And we met there and walked up to school and struck up a friendship which has persisted to this day. But it was interesting that we lived that close to one another and yet never really connected until we went to the junior high school, where all the kids in the city were mingled into one school. And that was an eye-opener, because all of a sudden I got to know non-Catholics for the first time. They weren't dangerous. In fact, they were nice kids. The girls were every bit as smart and as nice as the girls on French Hill. It was a very broadening experience for me. I was very happy there. Loved it.
Yeah, great. It's interesting that Gallagher Junior High, the school which I attended in junior high, is now no longer a junior high. It's the city. It's the district courthouse, and it's the offices of the superintendent of schools and some other city offices too. So, how things have changed through the years.
Well, every school I attended in Leominster is now closed.
Yeah. And we have new schools.
We have new schools.
We have new
That's right.
schools. We have some schools. So that this is one of the things. I'm getting a little off subject, but it's related. The Leominster Historical Commission. There is so much. There's an immense. If you're interested in Leominster and the history of Leominster, there's so much history, and both the Historical Commission is very much interested in Leominster history, and I know you're a member of the Leominster Historical Society, which is a wonderful organization and interested in Leominster history. So for those people, citizens of Leominster who are interested, there's these organizations. I know the Historical Society needs volunteers, and
Yes, indeed.
you have time and interest. There's so much to learn about the fascinating, really, history of Leominster. You mentioned Whitney Field, and in my younger days when I worked for the Recreation Department in the summers, Whitney Field, which is down by, now it's the backside of Searstown, there were 2 swimming pools. There was a very, very active summer program as part of the Leominster Recreation Department, and those swimming pools, very well maintained, were there when I was there and worked in the, would have been in the 1960s. And now they're no longer there. And but was that a place that the kids played with? Were the pools there when you were growing up?
Yes, they were. And it was very, very popular in the summer. Very popular. And that whole area was, we loved to go down there. We would go down the embankment, either at the end of 3rd Street, 2nd Street, 4th Street, whatever, follow Monoosnock Brook, cross Monoosnock Brook, where there was a great big marsh, Whitney's Marsh, if you want to call it that.
But Searstown
It
is
is
there
now
now.
Searstown.
Now
That's
it's
right. It
Searstown,
is now
but then it
Searstown.
was
That's right.
a
It was-
marsh.
And during World War II, Victory Gardens were there.
Ah,
My father had a Victory Garden. My grandfather had a Victory Garden. I learned that gardening is hard work. And later on, they laid out a primitive baseball field there too. And one of the priests at St. Cecilia's put together a league of kids from that neighborhood. That was Father Denome in his first visit with St. Cecilia's Parish. So that would have been 1947, 48 or thereabouts.
yeah, shortly after World War
That's
II.
right, just after World War
After
II.
World War II.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So much, you know.
Oh, so much,
one
yes.
little anecdote leads to another. You mentioned we're talking about World War II. The reference to that. You would have been about how old during that time?
I was 8 and a half when Pearl Harbor happened. And I happen to remember Pearl Harbor vividly because that afternoon my father took me to the Plymouth Theater to see Sergeant York. And I was 8 years old. War scenes were I was very impressionable. It had quite an effect on me. We came home and my mother told us about Pearl Harbor. And my first thought was, Daddy, do you have to go? And I was really frightened about that. He never did go because he was always just old enough. As they kept raising the bar, he was a little bit older all the time, so he didn't. But my uncle did serve in the Army.
And those were the days of the draft, or
Yes.
the volunteer and draft. You could volunteer and also
Yes.
the draft.
Everybody had
which-
to register with Selective Service
Right.
when they turned 18.
Right.
I had to when I turned 18.
As I did too.
You too, yeah.
And I think, and I don't want to be quoted on this, but I think that all males, even today, still have to register, but I'm not sure.
Maybe females too. I don't
And
know.
I don't know. It's different here.
Equal rights.
In 2003, that's when we're
Yeah.
taping this. Is there anything else particularly that vividly stands out in your mind, in your reflections on growing up in French Hill that you would like to share with us today?
Well, I've thought about that a lot, and as kind of referred to early, it was very secure, very safe. It was a village. At the same time, it was limiting. And I remember when I went to junior high school, as I said, it opened up so many things to me. But I'll tell you, growing up on French Hill, growing up in Leominster was a pleasure. I look back on it with nothing but happy thoughts and memories, and wouldn't have done it any other way.
Well, Gil, I think that I can't think of a better way to end this interview than with what you have just said, your final words, that I can't add a thing to that. We thank you very, very much for your being here today and for our our little snapshot of French Hill. And again, we thank Leominster Access Television and our fine interns from Leominster High for all their expertise.
My pleasure.
So thank you very, very much, Gil.
You're welcome.
Thanks.